Reinhardt versus Reinhardt is the pinnacle of Reinhardt mastery. Once you've learned how to outplay the enemy's shield bot, you're going to be the hero of every battle. Today, I'm going to walk you through some of the Rein v Rein mind games so that you can start clutching victories every time. My name is Nate, and welcome to Blizzard Guides. I do want to mention before I start the video that this is my experience as a 4.1k SR Rein main. I'm certainly not as good as the pros, nor is this guide foolproof. This is solely my experience playing Rein. I'm completely going off of my own playstyle that tends to work pretty effectively in matchmaking games. And also, before we get into this video, I do want to mention that today and tomorrow are the last days to enter the giveaway we have going on over at our Instagram page at overwatch.guides. We're giving away 4 sets of loot boxes, so if you want to get your hands on some summer game loot boxes, go ahead and check that out. But without further ado, let's get into this video. At number 7, the engagement. This is the stuff that most players get wrong that has really impacted the way that the fights work for me as Rein. Before I explain the Rein v Rein mechanics when engaging, I have to explain a few things about using shield and engaging. Basically, the way I use my shield is twofold. First, I try and use it to obviously protect my team. If someone dies before we're actually making it to point and engaging and I could have protected them, then I'm failing as a tank. Even if your teammate overextends a little bit, you can usually push up, rotate yourself 45 degrees, and protect them with the tip of your shield. This is something that you really have to master to really speed up fights, as you'll find that it has a huge impact on the game. Secondly, I use my shield as a sort of counter to the enemy's resources. The way I look at things is just based off of resources. If the enemy invests a lot of DPS abilities to break my shield, if I can get them to expend it all, I effectively allow my team to push up without the fear of just getting bursted down by the enemy's abilities. I can push up, protect a little bit, fall back, and continually do this until there is a strong opening for my team. This is the process of creating space. You push up, wait for the enemy to invest resources, and allow your team to invest resources, and then push up or fall back based on the openings in the enemy lines. If your team gets a pick during that waiting period, you can usually push up looking for an opening to start poking back and forth and then actually engaging and starting the team fight. Now, when the enemy has a Rein, you're going to want to apply this knowledge, but in a slightly different way. When you're pushing up, you're going to want to make sure that your team has a sightline to either beat the enemy Rein or give them an advantage to see past the Rein's shield, which typically means high ground or through a flank. If you can do either of these things, you immediately have the advantage in terms of resources, as you can think of the high ground or the element of surprise as a resource that you have. You have to get your enemy to win the shield battle pretty much before you've completely engaged. The enemy shield has to be lower than yours, or you have to be in a better shape to win the Rein v Rein in the engagement. Typically, the engage isn't about how well you counter the enemy Rein, but rather it's more about how well you manage the engagement for your team to prop yourself up during that poke and then the team fight. Make sure that you're near full health, have cooldowns, and are ready to build up your ult and then begin the poking phase. At number 6, we're going to start talking about the poking. You've got to use your hammer whenever you know that the team behind you isn't going to die, and be ready and watching to immediately protect and shield. Whenever you're up in the face of the enemy Rein, your best bet is just to constantly hammer and push the enemy Rein away with that knockback. If you do this, you draw resources in the form of healing from the enemy's DPS to the tanks. If you start pushing the enemy Rein around, the healers on the enemy team will stop healing their DPS and then start healing the tanks a bit more, allowing your DPS to return the favor and deal damage to the enemy's DPS while the enemy DPS does not have healing. You're also likely to draw the enemy Rein's shield down, allowing your DPS to then deal damage in the form of ult charging damage, and you put your shield back up while the enemy's is still down, putting your team in an offensive position with a protective barrier. If your DPS do get a pick in this phase, you usually want to start swinging aggressively and using the knockback of your giant body to literally push and harass the enemy frontline. If you see that something like a Pharah, Widow, Hanzo, or Junkrat prepare to burst, put your shield up for a bit to protect and then continue creating space. It's balancing this damage blocking and damage dealing that really makes a good Rein good. If you can protect your teammates from the high damage stuff that will kill them, you will not only negate the enemy's DPS ult, but you'll also allow some of the healing resources from your team to switch from your DPS to you, allowing you to play more aggressive, and so on and so forth. The cycle repeats. If you're on the defensive end and you're getting pushed around by the enemy Rein, you just want to aggressively hold your shield up, not allowing any damage to come come through except to your own shield. By doing this, you negate the enemy DPS ult charge and allow your DPS to start dealing damage to their tanks, gaining them ult charge, and you kind of balance the ult economy out. Unless, however, if the enemy DPS aren't in a position to deal damage to your team, in which case you should just start playing aggressively, forcing the enemy Rein to back up. This will not only provide your healers with ult charge in the form of the damage that you take, but you'll also provide your DPS with ult charge because the enemy Rein isn't going to necessarily be protecting anything except for himself. The only thing, however, is that once you do begin to play aggressively, here's when you should watch out for shatters. At number 5, the poking shatter. During this poke phase is usually when you'll see a shatter happening. On this point, I'll go over getting your shatter off, and then in the next point, I will go over blocking the enemy shatter. Whenever you're trying to get your shatter off, there's a few things that you should be looking out for. First and foremost, you're just going to want to look for that moment when the enemy Rein plays a bit too aggressive. If you see that the enemy Rein is full HP, has shield, and is ready to push, they'll typically not think about blocking shatter, and you'll find that if you swing right as they're about halfway through their swing, you'll be able to shatter without the need of them being stuck in any sort of animation. They'll also usually use charge if they have full resources, so if you can find them in a charge, you can shatter then and they'll be without a method to block it. The next situation is if they're fire striking. This is the most common way. As Rein, you should be using fire strike nearly off of cooldown, so if you see that the enemy Rein begins his fire strike animation, you shatter immediately without hesitation and you'll usually get the shatter off. Just remember to think constantly about when the fire strike might come out and use it even if you're only going to get 2 to 3 targets. It is better to make sure that you get the enemy frontline than whiff it and hesitate with the shatter. The final way is the hardest, but if you begin to play aggressive, you can usually find an opening when the enemy Rein backs up. If you start swinging at the enemy Rein, they'll typically start swinging back, allowing you to catch them as they swing. You'll cancel your swing with shatter, and they'll not really realize that the shatter hit them until they're stunned and dead on the ground. Next up at number 4, blocking those shatters. I'm going to go over the points above but from the other angle. If you're ready to play aggressive because you have full HP and full shield, just be ready to block it and watch out for the bait from the enemy shatter. You can't play aggressive and not be constantly thinking about the enemy shatter. If you don't, then you're just going to let it go right through you. If you think that the enemy Rein has shatter, you also just don't want to fire strike unless you know that you don't have allies behind you. This is also extremely crucial. Finally, if the enemy Rein starts swinging and immediately putting shield up, he knows that you probably have shatter and probably has shatter himself. You'll probably just want to be aware of that once they start swinging and shielding a lot. They're probably looking for a shatter and might begin playing aggressive. Don't swing back when they do this unless you're certain that you'll react fast enough to block the shatter. At number 3, there's a few things about counter shattering that you should know. If you successfully block shatter and you have shatter yourself, it's almost never a bad idea to immediately go for a shatter after you've blocked theirs. If they use shatter, they're usually going to push up too, allowing you to go for your shatter while they're busy swinging and trying to push up. Because typically whenever the Rein uses shatter, the enemy Lucio might speed boost them, or they'll just start investing a bunch of resources despite the fact that the shatter missed, allowing you to just use your shatter while they're investing resources and not using shield. Also, a minor thing to note, if the enemy is stuck in a grab and the Rein is caught in it, always be ready to block it. They're usually going to shatter to protect their team. If you block the shatter, you definitely do not want to shatter back, but if they do shatter and they're coming out of grab and they do land the shatter and you're not stunned yourself, you want to counter shatter almost immediately. There's a weird kind of counterplay here, but you basically just go off of, if your team is in danger, use the shatter to block them after their Rein used their shatter to block their team from danger, if that makes any sense. I'm just trying to word it in a bunch of different ways so that hopefully you understand it. It's a bit difficult to explain, but I hope you do understand this part. And at number 2, we're going to go over the mid fight. Here is where you want to just do the normal stuff that you do as Rein, just being ready to block the enemy shatter. Everything else you just do normal regardless of the enemy tanks. Push up, use the hammer to bully the enemy frontline around, and use fire strikes to drop enemy targets to half health or just to finish them off completely. You should be aware of the enemy damage though, and always be ready to block incoming damage if your allies need it. While you'll be playing aggressively as Rein here, you still want to make sure that you're always ready to block enemy ults and aggressive DPS players that might try and clutch the fight for their team. Try not to pin too far away so that you're always ready to shield your team, but still sometimes go for it. If you can get a pin on the enemy Rein or frontline tank, you can probably look for one here, but it is also not very optimal at times. You really just don't want to charge if you think your team might need you at some point in time. For example, if the enemy has a Soldier 76 and he might have tactical visor, you probably want to stay with your team so that you can shield it in the case that he tries and uses it to clutch the fight. If you charge and pin away and you're not there to block your team, he more than likely will get all of the kills that he needs, clutching the fight for his team. The main thing though is just focus on the enemy Rein shatter percentage and always be ready for a clutch shatter from the enemy Rein just in case. And finally, at number 1, just some miscellaneous stuff I couldn't really fit in any other sections or just didn't really want to try and fit them in there. If you swing, you can cancel the animation with a fire strike. Use this if you want to get some extra ult charge. This is really useful when you're playing aggressive and trying to bash the enemy Rein away. If you use that fire strike, you will always hit their Rein and you will usually hit subsequent enemies behind them. Another tip is just to wait outside of chokes outside of line of sight and charge the enemy Reins out of position. This is a pretty good strategy, even though it's a little bit risky. If you wait and you don't abuse it often and you just kind of randomly use it here and there, you'll usually get them off. Speaking of pins, you can counter pin an enemy Rein charge to force them in a bad spot. Don't do this if you're going to get melted by the enemy. If you're by yourself and you counterpin, you more than likely will die. But if you counterpin while the enemy Rein is just about going through your backline, you'll be able to kill him yourself. I usually counterpin whenever I am more towards my own backline. If you're going to get pinned but are full health and the enemy isn't going to bail their Rein out or kill you, let yourself get pinned and feed some support ult for your team. Rein Shatter is a worse ult than the support ults that you might get from this, so feeding enemy Rein some ult for your team's support ult is usually more valuable. Also, if the enemy Rein charges and hits the wall, you can usually charge him back and pin him back and get the kill on him. This works usually and is super valuable for your ult. Also, if you can shatter right after you land a pin, most enemy Reins won't expect it. This also works really well. And finally, I just want to describe the maximum debate strat. If you hold your shield and press left click, you can turn your camera 180 degrees. So what you want to do is put your shield facing your team so that your back is actually facing the enemy team. Hold your camera so that you're facing the enemy team and you can see the enemy but you're turned around 180 degrees, and then release your shield and use shield immediately right there after, releasing left click as well, and you'll turn 180 degrees instantly so that you can surprisingly block the enemy Rein shatter. I use this actually quite a bit and it usually turns out pretty well. You just have to practice it a lot, but it is really hilarious when you do actually get it off. Anyway, I hope this guide helped you guys out. Let me know if I missed anything in this video. I know that there is a lot that I covered here, so I almost definitely missed something. So if you have something to say, please leave it in the comments down below. If you have any general questions about the game, please also let me know about that. I love reading all of your guys' comments and I'm always looking to improve my videos. Also, don't forget about the Instagram giveaway. We still have that going on, so please make sure to go check that out. We have a lot of great content there. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it so that we know that you guys are enjoying this content and we can keep making stuff like this. And if you really like what we've got going on here, be sure to subscribe and get that notification bell turned on so that you can so that you never miss any of our videos and you can see all of our content. I would really appreciate it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this one. Have a nice day. My name is Nate and this was Blizzard Guides.